We tend to think about battles, right? We picture courage, brilliant tactics, clashing steel. But what if I told you one of the most famous battles of World War II wasn't really decided by any of that? What if it was decided by barrels of oil? This story, it's about a lot more than just tanks in the snow. It's about a fundamental, brutal truth of modern war. And it all starts with one discovery in a frozen forest that showed one side the war was, for all intents and purposes, already lost. So who's at the center of all this? This guy, SS Officer Joachim Peiper. And you gotta understand, at just 29 years old, he was a superstar in the German army, one of their most decorated, most ruthless commanders. He was the guy they picked to lead the charge, the very tip of the spear in the Battle of the Bulge. But one simple thing he saw, a pile of abandoned American supplies, it planted this single, absolutely devastating thought in his head, a thought that was basically a spoiler for the nightmare he was about to live through. Okay, so let's set the scene. It's dark, it's freezing. December 17th, 1944. Piper's elite panzer unit, these are the best of the best. They're supposed to be thundering across the Ardennes forest, the spearhead of Hitler's last big gamble in the West. They should be racing towards victory, but they're not. Instead, they're just stopped, dead in the snow, completely, utterly paralyzed. And the reason why? It's almost laughable if it wasn't so serious. You've got Germany's most powerful armored column. We're talking the legendary Tiger tanks, these terrifying machines, and they're just sitting there like giant, useless statues. And what stopped them? Not some heroic last stand, not a brilliant ambush. Nope. It was the simplest problem you can possibly imagine. They ran out of gas. Their engines just coughed and died. The entire offensive, this huge final push, was literally hanging by the thread of an empty fuel line. And then, just when it seems like it's all over before it's even begun, a breakthrough. His scouts find an American supply depot in this little village, Hansfeld. And you can tell the Americans left in a hurry. The coffee was supposedly still hot in the cups. And there, just sitting there, was the jackpot. Rows and rows of jerry cans. They do a quick count, it's 50,000 gallons of gasoline. For Peiper, this wasn't just a miracle. This was like a gift from the gods of war. Think about it. This one little abandoned depot had more fuel than his entire battle group was given for the whole operation. So you can just imagine the scene, right? His guys are going nuts, frantically refueling, pouring American gas into German tanks. The offensive is back on. They're saved. Right? Well, no. Because as Peiper is standing there watching all this incredible luck, that feeling of relief starts to curdle. It starts to turn into something else, something cold and dreadful. It stopped feeling like a miracle and started to feel like a warning, a horrifying peek behind the curtain at what he was really up against. And this is where the big question hits him, the question that changes everything. And you have to imagine it just sent a shiver right down his spine. The question was this: if this amount of fuel that literally just saved my entire offense, if this is what the enemy can afford to just abandon, what they can just leave behind without a second thought, then what impossible ocean of resources are they working with? Well, the answer to that question is found in the cold, hard math. And the numbers, they are just staggering. In 1944, the entire German war machine, I'm talking everything, all their synthetic fuel plants, all the oil fields they captured, they managed to produce about 33 million barrels of oil. Okay? 33 million. That same year, the United States alone produced 1.8 billion barrels. Let that sink in. Germany was trying to fight this massive modern war with less than 2% of America's oil. It wasn't a fair fight. It wasn't even a fight. It was a rounding error. And believe it or not, it gets even worse. Because in the depot office, Peiper's men found the paperwork, the shipping manifests, and they could literally trace the journey of a single one of those jerry cans they were now using. It started in a refinery in Texas, got shipped to New York, put on a boat across the entire Atlantic to Liverpool, then across the English Channel to Normandy, and then trucked 400 miles right to this little depot in Hansfeld. A journey of over 6,000 miles, and it took less than 6 weeks. This wasn't just about having a lot of stuff. This was about a logistical machine, a speed and a scale that was just beyond anything they could even comprehend. So what Peiper found at Hansfeld, that was just dipping his toe in the water. He was about to find out he was standing at the edge of an entire ocean. He was about to learn that his enemy wasn't just well supplied. No, they were operating in a totally different reality. A reality where fuel was so plentiful, so infinite, they could use it for more than just powering tanks. They could use it as a weapon. So, with their tanks full, Peiper's column pushes on. Their next big target is another, even bigger American fuel depot at a town called Stavelot. This was the real prize. But as they get close, they don't see soldiers, they don't hear gunfire, they just see a column of black smoke climbing thousands of feet into the sky. The American engineers, knowing they couldn't hold the depot, just set it on fire. They burned over 2 million gallons of their own gasoline just so the Germans couldn't have it. The fire was so huge, it burned for 3 straight days. I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. The Americans, almost casually, destroyed more fuel than Hitler had provided for his entire offensive. The whole thing. This wasn't war as the Germans knew it. This was something else. It was an industrial act of denial. When your enemy can burn millions of gallons of a precious resource as a simple tactical move, you're not playing the same game anymore. So how was this even possible? Well, they had this absolutely mind-boggling supply machine. You had things like the Red Ball Express, basically a non-stop 24/7 highway of 6,000 trucks, constantly moving supplies to the front. And then you had the really crazy stuff, like Operation Pluto. That stands for Pipelines Under the Ocean. Yeah, they literally laid oil pipelines on the seabed of the English Channel to pump 1 million gallons a day directly to France. The result of all this was just insane. The Allied forces in Europe were actually adding to their fuel reserves, even while they were fighting this massive offensive. So for Peiper on the ground, and for the generals back at headquarters, this horrifying realization is starting to sink in. This isn't about fighting spirit anymore. It's not about better tactics. It's just math. Simple, brutal, and completely unwinnable math. Let's just look at the numbers side by side. It's stark. Peiper's elite unit, the tip of the spear, started the attack with about 31,000 gallons of gas, okay? The U.S. First Army, and that's just one of the American armies in the area, they had 3.7 million gallons just sitting in reserve. In one day, one single day of fighting, the Americans would burn through more fuel than Peiper was given for the entire push. You have one army where... And here's the kicker. Germany's own famous technology, it was actually working against them. Their awesome Tiger tank? An engineering marvel, sure, but it was a logistical nightmare. It drank 2.5 gallons of fuel for every single mile it drove. Meanwhile, the humble little American Sherman tank, the one they mass-produced by the tens of thousands, it used less than a gallon per mile. It's like Germany had built this magnificent thoroughbred racehorse, but they had absolutely no food to feed it. So this dawning horror that Peiper felt in that frozen forest, it wasn't just him. That realization was spreading, rippling all the way up the German chain of command, and it was confirming a terrible suspicion that some of them already had. This war wasn't going to be won by soldiers. It was going to be won by factories, by refineries, by an industrial power an ocean away. And look, this wasn't just some revelation for a young officer on the front lines. This is a quote from General Hasso von Manteuffel. He was the commander of the whole 5th Panzer Army, and he says it plain as day. The second he heard that the Americans had destroyed 8 million gallons of fuel just so his men couldn't get it, he knew. He knew the offensive had already failed. It hadn't just failed on the battlefield, it was a failure before the first tank even started its engine. And so we come to the end, and it's just a pathetic end for this once mighty armored force. On the night of December 23rd, they're surrounded, they're totally out of gas. Peiper gives the order, abandon the vehicles, escape on foot through the snow. His men, these elite panzer troops, had to take explosives and destroy 39 of their own beautiful, perfectly working tanks. Millions of Reichsmarks of advanced machinery destroyed by their own crews, all for the lack of a few gallons of gasoline. So what's the big lesson here? What's the takeaway? Well, you could call it logistical reality, and it's a brutal, simple truth. It's the principle that in modern war, no amount of courage, no brilliant battlefield tactic can make up for an enemy who can produce and supply their army on a scale you can't even wrap your head around. For the Germans, the Battle of the Bulge wasn't just a defeat, it was a very, very harsh education in that reality. And maybe nothing captures this better than a simple conversation that happened 40 years later at a reunion between American and German veterans. The German veteran was talking about their constant, desperate struggle for fuel. And the American staff sergeant just looked at him, kind of stunned, and said, "We never knew you were that short. We had so much we never thought about it." Just let that sink in.
They fought in the same battle, but they were living in two completely different universes. For one, every drop of fuel was life and death. For the other, it was so abundant they didn't even think about it.
And that really leaves us with a final and pretty challenging thought. This whole story, it's not just some interesting anecdote from World War II. It's a timeless lesson about the raw, cold math of power, and it forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question, one that's still relevant today. In modern conflict, does courage even matter when your enemy's waste is more than your entire supply?